You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. This week we re-encounter two guests who visited us before, back now with breaking news about their new activities. Lenora Lee, choreographer, dancer, and aesthetic historian of Chinese American women's history, is debuting a new piece in New York. Julie Burton, president of the Women's Media Center, is here to discuss the absolute sensation caused by the WMC's 2014 just-released report on the status of women in media. And we welcome a friend of over 20 years who keeps on making history, this time on film, the small woman with the huge quotient of courage, Anita Hill. But first we need to look inside the headlines. Have you noticed the seemingly growing frequency of unsourced or anonymous or unattributed quotations in your newspapers and your television news? Well, Margaret Sullivan, who is the public editor of the New York Times, has noticed. As the public editor, she is our ombudswoman. She's the representative of the reader, and she's been a guest on this program, a terrific person. And she has established something that she's calling Anony Watch, for anonymous, ANONYWATCH, which will track nameless quotations in the New York Times because she's getting pretty cranky about them. For example, a piece on New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio visiting New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo went like this. De Blasio went into this thinking that he and Cuomo were friends, a Democratic insider said, speaking on condition of anonymity because of concern over retribution. But Andrew Cuomo doesn't really have friends. Now that's the end of the quote from the story. And Sullivan comments, well, wait a minute, whoa, how does that square with the Times' written rule that we don't smear people anonymously? She's quite right. There's also another example that she gives, a news story about the Malaysian missing airplane, and an anonymous quotation saying that possibly the pilot went to a higher altitude to depressurize the cabin to incapacitate the passengers so as to carry on his plan uninterrupted. And she replies, quoting a reader who complained, there's absolutely no reason to quote an anonymous source who's making a ridiculous claim of this sort, especially since the reporter could have called any of 100 other pilots who would have gone on record saying this was garbage. Now, we're getting our news in a gesture of trust that these are real quotations from reputable people. But as she points out, not always the case. She also notes that anonymous sources and quotations sometimes do have their place in stories, in rare instances when there's no other way of getting crucial information. But obviously, the vast majority of these unattributed quotes do not fall in that category. You can write to her and add your examples. She would like that. All you have to do is look up Anony Watch on Google, and it will bring you to the blog, which is basically publiceditor.blogs.nytimes.com. And let's hope it's a model for the rest of the country. Anonymous, they say, was a woman, but she wasn't giving quotes. And if she had, I think she would have wanted her name attached to them. And now it's time for our first guest. Lenora Lee has been a guest on this program before. She's a theater artist working as a dancer, a choreographer, and a conceptual artist. And the material she works with is Chinese women's history and Chinese American women's history, thoroughly and accurately researched. One of her works, commissioned by the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco through their Artist Fellows program, is now coming to New York. Lenora, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Robin. It's great to be here.
Well, welcome to New York. I know that you're West Coast based usually, but and of course, the last time that you were on the program, we talked about the remarkable work that you do in interdisciplinary performances on the history of the early 20th century Chinese women migrants, and you use dance and martial arts and film and music and an entire environment. And now you're bringing it to New York. So tell us about The Escape, which is going to be debuting in New York in very shortly.
Sure. So in 2012, I started doing research in San Francisco, Chinatown, at an organization called Donaldina Cameron House. And it was formed in 1874 by Presbyterian missionaries, originally as the Occidental Mission Home for Girls. And during that period of time, there was initially a large wave of Chinese male laborers coming over to work in the gold mines and on the railroads. And because there was such a lack of women here, in the mid-1800s, there became this underground industry of bringing young girls and women over, in part to serve as domestic servants. But sometimes the women were forced into servitude and then forced into prostitution. And so I had been familiar with the work at Donaldina Cameron House for quite some time and was interested in finding out more about its roots and its founding and the work that was done there to help and service the Chinese women and young girls. Now, at that time, the Presbyterian missionaries were trying to help these women who were in these forced labor situations out of them, and they fought in the courts and tried to gain custody of them and provided shelter, job skills training. They, wanted them to become Christians. And so
that's always the problem with missionaries. The bill comes due and take my value system. But go on.
Yes. So in part, I was having a discussion with a friend the other day, and had there not been the missionary support, I'm not sure what kind of support these women at that period of time would have gotten.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, so the research that I did was in their archives. There were handwritten notes and letters between the young women and the missionaries. There were also court documents and first-hand accounts that the women had to give in terms of, where they were located, how many times they were bought and sold, and how they, where they had to serve and what they had to do. And so just reading that information was quite disheartening, and because I had this archival information, I also felt like I needed to understand the emotional experiences and consequences of these situations. So I also turned to the Asian Women's Shelter and Asian Pacific Islander Legal Outreach, both of which have programs to support survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking. Now, I spoke with current-day advocates about what's happening now in terms of human trafficking, and they gave me a host of different stories and situations. And so the piece that I created, The Escape, is based on a collage of various stories, both found in the archives at Cameron House and through discussions with the advocates at these two organizations.
It's amazing historic and psychological research that you've done for these pieces. Not all artists do that. So this is a historic document as well as an aesthetic one. And,
right.
Yeah. Right. And Rescued Memories, New York Stories, retraces the life of Bessie M. Lee.
Yeah.
Tell us about her.
Sure. So in my initial research in New York, I was brought on as a visiting scholar at New York University through their Asian Pacific American Institute. Mm-hmm. And they have provided me information to get a hold of various community historians who understand and have had generations of, say, family members or friends grow up through the New York Chinatown in Manhattan. And so I spoke with various people, and one person that I was in contact with, his name is Lenora Lee. And Larry is the executive director of the New York Asian Women's Center, which also provides services for survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking. And in conversations with him, he told me about his grandmother, who is Bessie Lee, who was brought over in the early 1900s to serve as a domestic servant to two wealthy Chinese people. She and another woman were brought over, and then were subsequently not paid for 2 years. And so she ended up running away and seeking help from her English teacher. Now, in the evolution of things, the English teacher was a missionary who then converted to become a Lutheran missionary. And in later years, they were instrumental in forming the True Light Lutheran Church in Chinatown.
I see. Fascinating. And this will all be in performances, and both evenings performances. There's only 2 evenings for folks who are in the New York area, and we'll talk about when and where in just a minute. But both evenings performances will be followed by special conversations that feature the artists and scholars and community organizers, so the entire thing is put in context.
That's correct.
Wow, you really do a thorough job there, Lenora Lee.
Well, it was great to be having the support of NYU and also of Asia Society, and they're really, coming forth to present these pieces in the best way possible through the context of current day issues and trafficking. So it's a great experience.
Well, now give our listeners all the information they need if they want to be able to get tickets, and where and the actual dates.
Sure. The performances will be at Asia Society in New York. It's at 725 Park Avenue. And they are Thursday, May 8th and Friday, May 9th at 8 p.m. And you can go to the website asiasociety.org /new-york. And then you can look up on their upcoming events tab and find information there. There's also an apa.nyu.edu link. So either one will work. And my website also has the information, which is www.lenoralee.dance, LENORALEE dance.com.
LenoraLeeDance.com. That's the Asia Society, and it's May, say again?
8th and 9th.
May 8th and 9th, right. And the Asia Society is on Park Avenue in New York, and the ticket information is APA, like Peter Ann, apa.nyu.edu/events. It is really worth a see, and particularly with the whole discussion afterwards. Lenora, you do great work, and I can't wait to see it, and I thank you so much for bringing alive this buried women's history and doing so in a way that is historically accurate and aesthetically moving. That's an unbeatable combination.
Thank you so much, Robin.
We have to take a short break. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I'm Robin Morgan. Did you know that men receive 63% of byline credits in all print, internet, and wire news stories? They do. And when we come back, we'll find out how and why.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome back. You know how you go to certain sources for statistics on a particular subject, like Pew, PEW, for statistics on religion in the United States and religious users, and you'd go to, say, Guttmacher Foundation for statistics on reproductive rights. Well, it seems that the Women's Media Center is moving into that gold standard go-to place in terms of statistics on the status of women in media. The issuing of the new report caused quite a furore. And here is Julie Burton, the president of the Women's Media Center and the one who oversees that project every single year, to tell us about it. Julie, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin. I am very happy to be on WMC Live with you.
Well, I am sitting here celebrating the publication this year of the 2014 Status of Women in the U.S. Media, which is even more sobering, but more compendious than last year. It's just fantastic. Really, bravo to you and the team who put this together.
Thank you. You know, I am proud of this report. I think it is a signature document, not only for the Women's Media Center, but for the movement. It is a comprehensive view of all platforms of media, and these reports that are part of the compilation come out over the year. You'll get a report on film or one aspect of film. You'll get a report on one aspect of radio. And the news is generally not good, but you'll think of it only in that tunnel, that channel of that one piece. The power of this report is that it's all pulled together, and it hits you in a very strong way. I mean, the news is stark. We are 51% of the population, but we still are struggling for an equal share of the jobs, of the ability to shape the stories, to tell the stories, to be quoted in the stories. We have a ways to go. But without a report like this, people don't understand there's a problem.
It's the cumulative effect. You're absolutely right.
I want to tell you about the overall report and then the original research that we have in there that I think is so important. Overall, our message is the media is failing on nearly every media platform. But when we looked a little closer this year, women of color, the numbers are more dire for them. It is a reality that we have not yet achieved equality for our sisters, and we have a lot of work to do. We also looked at sports coverage. 90% of all sports editors are men. Not only are they men, they're white. And when we compared that with the market of the National Football League, Major League Baseball, National Basketball Association, National Hockey League, women represent 35% of the market. Women are 35% of the people watching sports, supporting this business, and we are not telling the stories, and we're not part of the story. There was an ad that came out this year that got a lot of traction, which I love. It's a Verizon ad for Football Girl. She's the girl in the anchor booth. And this is kind of unheard of because women don't get into the football anchor booth. And one of the arguments has been, well, those analysts, have to have played football to be in the anchor booth, but Greg Gumbel, Al Michaels, Kenny Albert, Chris Berman, none of them played football.
What do you know?
They're all in the anchor booth.
What do you know?
And there are phenomenal women's sports reporters who have been on the sidelines. It seems to be where they're putting women, reporting from the sidelines. They are very ready and prepared and qualified to be in the sports anchor booth. Pam Oliver, Michelle Tafoya, Susie Kolber, Tracy Wolfson. We've got a list of people who would be terrific. And another aspect of this sports coverage that really spoke to me is as we were coming out with this report, the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition was coming out.
Grown.
And they put on the cover Barbie as a Sports Illustrated model. And there was a full-page ad, national ad in the New York Times for Barbie that she's unapologetic to be a Sports Illustrated model. And the message that sends to girls is this is what you need to aspire to be. So there are maybe 3 a year who can be that. Whereas in tech, 89% of tech startups are launched by all-male teams. 47% of the gamers are women, but only 12% of the game developers are women. I would have loved to have seen Barbie put an anchor, sports anchor Barbie on, in the ad, or tech Barbie. They have a tech Barbie. Why not celebrate her? This helps women economically. It's a role that we can take and build and lead successful lives with, and it's a piece of media that we need to be able to see ourselves as tech leaders, as business leaders. So then Another piece of our research, which I think is really important, is we conducted original research this year for this report, the Women's Media Center. We reviewed 27,000 pieces of content from October 1, 2013 until December 31st, 2013. We looked at the top 10 national newspapers by circulation. We looked at 4 evening news broadcasts, the major news, NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS. We looked at the 2 major wire services, AP and Reuters, and 4 major internet news sites. And female journalists were more likely to report on lifestyle, culture, and health. Yeah. Men were likely to cover politics, criminal justice, technology, but men dominated all of the topics according to the research. Of the nation's 10 top circulated newspapers, men garnered 63% of the bylines compared to 37% for women. Well, we look at the PBS news broadcast and we see Judy Woodruff and Gwen Ifill, and that's a great thing. And we look at ABC and we see Diane Sawyer in that anchor seat. I just want to remind people, this isn't about putting one woman in an anchor seat.
Exactly.
It's about the whole pipeline.
Yep.
And when we look behind the scenes at these news outlets for broadcasting, the correspondents are the ones who are in the pipeline to move up. And at PBS, 57% of the correspondents were men. At ABC, 66 were men. CBS, 72% were men. And NBC, 63% were men. When we go to the online area, which we had all hoped was the revolution, and I think it still can be the revolution, but we're seeing the online news organizations somewhat reflect the print structure for a power and who gets hired and who gets to write the bylines.
Right.
We found that for Huffington Post, it came the closest to equity, but the issue with the Huffington Post is most of their reporters are not paid, and they will not release the numbers. So the message here is, if it's unpaid, women succeed.
There you go. Yeah.
It's just, it's astounding, but I think very important to see. We also when we looked at the wires, we found that Reuters had a much better number of women than AP, and, wanted to talk to them about examples and recommendations of how they got to that number. They're still not at 50%. They're at 43%.
Right.
But they are a good chunk ahead of AP.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity for young journalists when they come in, and these wire services are an opportunity to tell a story and get a voice out there nationally.
Right. Julie, we've only got about a minute left. We should be very sure that people know how they can get a hold of this information.
Yes, come to womensmediacenter.com. At womensmediacenter.com, you can download the full report. Anybody who has a voice and can advocate on these issues, I think it's really important to take a look at the report at womensmediacenter.com.
It really is, and it also, I might add, for the average person is eminently readable and accessible with colorful graphs, and the information just pops out at you, so it's easy to access and easy to retain. Thank you so much for having done this report, Julie, for all the work you do for Women's Media Center Live, and for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Thanks, Robin.
Now it's time for some news you can use. Did you know that 3 out of 4 teenage girls report feeling guilty, depressed, and shameful after spending just 3 minutes leafing through a typical fashion magazine filled with digitally perfected images of women? And 31% of teenage girls admit to starving themselves to be skinnier and like those models. And nearly 20% of high school boys suffer from some form of disordered eating behavior. Well, there's a piece of legislation pending that we should get behind. It's called the Truth in Advertising Act of 2014, and it aims to discourage advertisers from using photoshopped, airbrushed images of women and men to sell their products. The bill asks the Federal Trade Commission to investigate how the media uses pictures that materially change the physical characteristics of the faces and bodies of individuals in order to sell their products. Many other countries, including the United Kingdom and Australia, have regulatory organizations that monitor advertising for unhealthy messages. But this act, it would consider that censorship, and so this act pushes both advertisers and the government to take responsibility for the harmful effect of images that perpetuate impossible beauty ideals. There's a petition at change.org. It's called the Join Our Family to Stop Advertising That Hurts Our Children petition, or you can write your congressperson to support H.R. 4341, the Truth in Advertising Act, and do away with photoshopped images of bulimic models. Time for another short pause. This is Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. When we come back, well, very few events occur in such a dramatic fashion that you can say, up till this happened, things were thus and such, and after it happened, everything was changed. There are very few people you can say that about, because change is incremental. But this next guest, stay tuned.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome back. On October 11th, 1991, a young African-American female law professor sent shockwaves through the country as she sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee testifying to the lewd behavior of a Supreme Court nominee. It was a lightning rod moment. Her attempt to report on Clarence Thomas's conduct quickly was turned into a perverse and vicious public attack on her own character and credibility. With Thomas playing the race card and a panel of white male senators lobbing ideological bombs, her hearing became a charade of justice. But her insistence on speaking truth to power set off a national debate about sexual harassment that revolutionized gender politics. We believed her then, we still believe her now. Here is Anita Hill. Dear Anita, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
It's a pleasure.
Well, we go back a ways because I was thinking in preparing for this interview how amazingly young you were, and how when this extraordinary explosion hit 22 years ago now, I was the editor-in-chief of Ms. at the time, and I set my teeth in a really stubborn feminist way into thinking that when you made your first statement, it should be in the pages of Ms. And I pursued you like the hound of heaven, and you did write your first statement for Ms. magazine, and I was so honored, and the magazine was so honored, and that's where we first communicated with each other.
Well, and I remember that so well, and the negotiation that we had about whether or not there could be other voices in that particular issue. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't do it in that issue, but ultimately we were able to get some really fantastic people commenting, including Kimberly Crenshaw.
That's right.
Who, of course, now is quite a superstar. Mm-hmm. So you were wise and wonderful then, and I think it's still giving dividend.
Well, thank you. We had you as a standalone, and then we followed up with the others. But I remember saying, this is women's movement turf, and you can say anything you want for as long as you want. It didn't have to be a word count, and it's yours to play with. And it was a wonderful piece that you wrote, So that's where we started, and now there is this remarkable film, and it's a small world because the executive producer for the film happens to be the mother, the founding sponsor, Regina Scully of this program. So she's still doing good things, and it's, of course, the director is Frida Mock, who is an Academy Award-winning filmmaker, and the film is Anita, Speaking Truth to Power. And it's playing now around the country and eventually around the world. It was an official Sundance selection. It's a remarkable film. And in watching it, I was reminded again how heartbreakingly young you were, that you just stood up to all this entire panel of white men with such dignity and courage. My God, doesn't it strike you what a baby you were?
Well, I think we were all young in a sense, don't you? In terms of how even we didn't quite understand the significance of what was being said at that moment for liberating a whole lot of women and even some men. To be able to confront some of the problems that we face in the workplace and in the military and in schools. And so I think that when people see me, that young me, I think they should also think about how we were all very unaware, or I won't say entirely naive, but we just had no sense at that point in time where we were headed with it. And that's sort of how I think about the youth. It was the youth of an idea, of a concept that these experiences really mattered, and that they could change the course of women's lives. But I do believe that they change, in some ways, our culture and our society's acceptance of these experiences.
Totally, yes. I think it may be one reason I'm so glad that the film exists now is because I don't think that people who didn't experience it, younger women and men, can fully grasp, and they can in the film, the absolute enormity of the impact. Because I remember at Ms., because the media always covers itself and assumes that somehow there's a plot behind it, the media kept calling and saying, did the women's movement put you up to this? And we kept saying, no, what? And there's a total snowstorm of letters and phone calls came into the Senate and to Congress. And of course, the congressional women marched over to the Senate. And I remember crossing streets in New York City and was standing waiting for the light and hearing women on the street corner arguing with men shouting, "You just don't get it, do you? You just don't get it." And everybody was talking about it. It created a totally different climate. And then as the ripple effects went out, as you well know, it was not only sexual harassment in the office, but it was on campus, it was in the factory, it was in, walking along the street harassment, and that in turn led to a greater awareness on sexual assault and everything else.
Oh, absolutely. This is as what I like to describe now is there's a whole spectrum of behavior that has benefited from women having those arguments, if you will, on the street corner and in their kitchens about why this was so important to us. I want to say that one thing is sort of give you a sense of, it was 1991, but it seemed when you look at the film, you'll see that panel of the Senate, all of these men, white men, sitting there in their gray suits, and they're surrounded by this bevy of staff, and there's me in this sort of green dress, and I can't even imagine that I could have chosen a more contrasting color than that. And the image of that really seems something more like the 1950s than the 1990s.
Yes.
But the other sort of humorous reference that I have to how long ago it might feel was that there, you talked about the letters that came pouring into the Senate.
Yeah.
Actually, there were telegrams.
Right.
And there were so many telegrams, I'm told, that they shut down Western Union. So, who gets telegrams anymore? But on that day, I guess the telegrams were almost the equivalent of emails today.
Sure.
And so that they collapsed the system for sending those messages to the Senate and really saying, you have to respond. You cannot ignore
That's right.
what Anita Hill has to say. But the other thing that I want to say is about the film. You mentioned Regina Scully and her being an executive producer. I think that is also an indication of what 22 years has meant. We now live in a visual world, and we now have women like Frida Mock, who are veteran filmmakers, and Regina Scully, who can help support this kind of film. One of the people who is very involved in this film is a woman named Frida Kapoor Klein, who, interestingly, was doing press in trying to inform the people about the problem of sexual harassment. She was one of the very first people to do research on sexual harassment in the workplace. And so 22 years later, I think in so many ways we have come of age, and we're ready to have a new and different kind of awakening and movement forward.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the moments when I realized that as well, and I thought back to the panel, the contrast between you and the panel then, was recently when there were hearings about sexual harassment, of course, and sexual assault in the military against women. And there was, in the hot seat where you had sat, there were all of these stern, uniformed, white male generals. And on the other side, in the Senate committee, was for the first time almost a critical mass of women senators, grueling them and saying, "That's not a sufficient answer, sir." And I thought, my God. And I thought back to the panel and you, and that is a huge change. It's very true.
It's a sea change. And it just shows why our presence is so important in those bodies. They're present because of the deliberations that go on behind the scenes, but they're also present in terms of the public confidence in whether or not we can, in fact, trust our representation.
Yes.
They ask questions that maybe the men won't ask or can't even formulate.
Yes.
And so that experience really is important today, and will continue to be important, not only on this issue, an issue of sexual assault in the military, which is clearly on the front pages of our press,
right.
But any number of issues, it's a debate about equal pay, or whether it is concerns about sexual assault on college campuses. We have still a real need to be represented and to have our real lives and reflected in the policies that come out of Washington.
Indeed, absolutely. And there's also another aspect to it, though. You are characteristically, as usual, always turning the attention to what others did and what others have done and what we need. But there is something about this story, and it's there in the film too, speaking truth to power, about this young woman, this young attorney who is not going to stand down, and the cost that she paid, the cost you paid, the death threats, the threats to your family, the fears about job loss, the reputation smears, and it's interesting to me that later on, when was it Brock? He had been a right-wing writer at one point, and he traduced you, and then he took it back and said that he had been David Brock in the 1993 book, The Real Anita Hill, and he recanted for the character assassination. And to this day, I can't quite forgive Joe Biden for not permitting the other three women to testify that the same thing had happened to them, which would have changed everything. But this went on and on and on, and you've been paying for it for many years with extraordinary grace. I mean, you've built a life. You're a wonderful, beloved professor. You've written books and published them, and you're the you now. But the cost was considerable, and it's important, I think, for younger women to understand that too.
I think it absolutely is, and I think it's important in a number of ways that we try to bring out in the film. And one of the things that I want the people to understand as they watch the film is that the process really matters. The way that the Senate and Joe Biden as chair set up that process was a deliberate attempt, or maybe an inadvertent one, but it was one that was effective. It effectively said that this is a he said, she said matter.
Right.
Which, in fact, as you have referred to, there were 3 other women who were ready to talk about very similar information, very similar behavior that they had experienced or had witnessed. And that in and of itself, that alone says that all of this talk about, well, it's only her word against his, was something that was contrived.
Totally.
It wasn't true. It wasn't accurate. And so there are, you're right, there are costs to that process going the way that it did.
Yes.
Because after it was sort of set up that way, and some of the allegations that the various senators raised about what my motives were, and even worse, things that were said by Alan Simpson and Orrin Hatch waving a copy of the Exorcist.
Yes, you were possessed or something. Unbelievable.
Yes. But that opened the door for lawmakers and critics in Oklahoma to attack me even after the hearing was over.
Where you were teaching at the time.
Where I was teaching, where I had been tenured, and where I had made a life and where I'd grown up, where my family lived. And they had to live through all of that. But I do say, Robin, that I was quite fortunate in that I had my parents and my siblings' undying support. It never yielded. I also had the support of many of my colleagues at the University of Oklahoma College of Law, where I was teaching. And so what I tell women, young and old and middle-aged, when they are coming forward, make sure you know what your support is. Because even today, not everybody has what I have. And that's tragic. And I think that makes it all the more important that they have fair processes.
Of course. But go ahead.
But that level of support that I had really enabled me to sort of weather the storm of those attacks, and actually then enabled me to be able to say, you know what, I have got to make something out of this terrible situation. It's not just enough to get over it and go back to my life as it was, which was really impossible. But I have to do more with this. Right. And the film is another effort to do that.
You have done more with it. And it must have been, I mean, the support from the family, you probably knew you could count on, but you didn't know, you had no idea what you uncorked. Our mutual friend, wonderful Eleanor, said, Eleanor Holmes Norton, the congressional delegate from D.C., noted that in 1992, a year later, that became the year of the woman. Not that we were not going to seize more than a year, but that women flooded the polls with the notion that you had to have more women in Congress because they'd seen it. They'd see. And what did it feel like when you discovered that there were all these women who basically were saying, "You too"?
Well, I think what I was so feeling so embattled that I think when I first noticed it was from the letters that started coming to me directly. It was so important for me to hear from people who were writing from their hearts. about what they had experienced and how they saw the hearings in starkly different terms than what was being portrayed by a lot of people in the press those days.
Yes.
And a lot of people who were even blaming me, saying, oh, no woman's ever going to come forward again because of what I had done. And so it was just important for me to hear from real people about their experiences. And I started getting those letters, and I have and continue to receive thousands. I have estimated roughly about 25,000, and I keep getting them. And I think that's one of the things that I had counted on, and I think that's what we need to do to encourage more women to get into politics. Yes. Because there are voices out there that will confirm that not enough is going on our behalf. And I will say this, that when I initially started hearing from people, I was hearing primarily from women. But in the last few years, I would say that roughly 40% of the people I hear from in very supportive ways are men.
That's encouraging.
And that I think, and that's why I think I keep going. People say, well, I'm sort of Pollyannish or I'm an optimist. I don't know, but I have seen change, and I've seen it in my lifetime, and the way people think and talk, and it just helps me believe that I can continue to see even greater change.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that our adversaries are scared. I think they're terrified that the country is no longer majority white. They're terrified at the first black president. They're terrified at women coming into our power. They're terrified of change and growth. And I think a lot of their hate comes from that terror, which doesn't make it any the less vile and destructive. But where you've been, where you've come from, what you did, and what you continued then to do, what you're doing right now in your teaching, in your books, in this film, is what keeps me going and a whole lot of other women. So thank you for all of the above and for all that you'll yet do, because as far as I'm concerned, you're only getting started,
Well, that's what I feel like some days.
Well, you know that
some days I feel like I soon should be retiring. But as I one of the things about the film that is so good, in addition to the fact that you see this very wonderful family, you see 3 generations of my family in this film.
That's a great part.
But the other thing is that you see young women and girls who are so emboldened to fight, whether it's street harassment or to talk with young women who are in schools or kids who are being bullied and harassed in schools. I say this, and I'll keep saying it, I think we're leaving them a legacy that they will then take and extend even beyond where we think it can go.
Yes.
And we have prepared them to do so.
Yes. And as also, that I still have my fantasy. My fantasy is that maybe if Hillary becomes president, maybe it'll happen with Hillary. I'm just locked into my fantasy, which is that at some point, Clarence Thomas will actually be impeached from the Supreme Court, and that at some point, some president will name you to the court. That, you always laugh at me, I know, but that would be justice, and I still have this whole fantasy in my mind about how it would play out. Maybe I need to write it as a novel so that it can begin to life can imitate.
Well,
I want life to imitate art.
Novel.
Yeah.
Well, I would buy the novel, definitely. And in the meantime,
yes,
I will continue to do all that I can.
All that you can is a lot indeed. Bless your dear self. I love you lots. Thank you for being with us. The film, which is Anita, Speaking Truth to Power, is in now in movie theaters across the country. So look for it. Go to its website. If you can't find it, make a situation where you can have a showing. It is an important film. It's a moving film. It's a positive film, and it will thrill you and inspire you to do even more. Thank you so much, Anita, for being with us.
Oh, gosh, it really, really was my pleasure. Thank you, Robin, for doing all that you're doing to keep us informed.
Time for one more break here at Women's Media Center Live, where I am still, predictably, Robin Morgan. When we come back, it'll be time for those fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
And we're back again in time for Fighting Words. You may well, I hope, have heard of the Trail of Tears. This was a long march, forced in 1838, of more than 15,000 Cherokees, members of the Cherokee Nation, forced from their native land in Appalachia to so-called Indian country in Oklahoma when the U.S. government wanted all Indians in the same general area, the better to be contained. It was 2,200 miles of land and water routes, and the more than 15,000 Cherokee who were on this forced march suffered greatly. It is estimated that as many as 8,000 died. Now we learn something else, that in addition to dying of disease, starvation, cold, and exhaustion, now a study of Cherokee remains suggests that the stress interfered with the normal growth of their skulls. The author of the study, Ann Ross, an anthropologist at North Carolina State University, says it's a sign that something was going on in the environment that was hindering growth. The study appears in the Annals of Human Biology. Previous studies have demonstrated that cranial length is affected by stress. And for the new research, the authors looked at skull measurements of adult Cherokees born between 1783 and 1874. And the skulls of those born in the later period were significantly shorter than those born earlier. A few Cherokee were able to avoid the forced march by hiding in the Smoky Mountains, and skull measurements from that group indicated that their cranial lengths also shrank, but not as much. Ross says they were not necessarily removed from their native land, but they were hiding in the mountains, facing harsh winters, a lack of food, and stress. This type of research, she says, offers a way to interpret the effects of historical events and could help us address things currently occurring in the developing world. I'll say, think of all those countries and regions where there are internally displaced persons. Think of all those regions and countries where people are in forced exile or necessarily chosen exile. Think of displacement and stress. Think of stress. We're changing ourselves and each other, even physically. And the attitude of no consequences that we have toward what we do today stands in marked contrast to, in fact, the Indian, the Native American premise that what you do, you must think of reverberating through 7 generations. 7 generations in the future. That's a long time. It's a time we would hope there would still be people around. But possibly not if we behave the way we have been. And that's it for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS Radio WJFK 1580 AM or visiting us at WMClive.com for this and for the whole rich archive of all our previous episodes. Be sure to find WMC Live at iTunes, too, worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, Senior Producer, Crystal Williams Chancellor, and our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan. Thank you for being with us. Join us next week when Brittany Cooper of the Crunk Collective will be here, and when we make history, a bit of it, ourselves. I've said all along that this program had women as its priority, and to date, our 80th episode, all our guests have been women. But I've also said that this didn't preclude ever having a man on the show if the circumstances truly warranted that. Well, in this case, they do. So next week, I will be having a conversation with our first male guest. Look for us on Facebook and Twitter for alerts about just who this mystery man is. He's quite special, and he will be here with us, and only here, on Women's Media Center, live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio and WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.